Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Tin Man's Corner channel. I'm your host, Jeffrey, the Tin Man Taylor Scarecrow today. I'm reacting to my second Shiny Gold Tails video for you guys, and this was titled 4 True Chilling Halloween Horror Stories Volume 2. So without further ado, I'm going to turn these lights off, move the camera up for you guys, and let's get this reaction on the road and in the bag. And I hope you all don't get scared. Okay, here we go.
This happened a long time ago on Halloween. I was about 11 or 12 years old back then.
Okay.
Every year, I would go trick-or-treating with my best friend Josh and his family. My parents would stay home and hand out candy at our house, and I would go trick-or-treating in the neighborhood.
You see, I did not go trick-or-treating by myself. If I decided to go with friends or cousins, we always had our moms and dads with us all the time because you never know if you might end up going to a stranger's house and they give you candy with razor blades or poisons in it. Or they might end up abducting you and your parents did not know what happened. But anyway, let's continue with this guy's story and see what happens, shall we?
Josh and I were still young enough that we needed to have an adult around when we went out, but we were starting to enter that rebellious stage. Therefore, we were constantly trying to get away from Josh's mom, who was our chaperone for the evening. She was also busy with Josh's little sister, so it was not long before the two of us were pretty much on our own. Josh and I continued ringing doorbells for an hour or so when another kid approached us. He said his name was Tim and asked if he could join us. Tim was a few inches taller than Josh and I, and we guessed he was probably a few years older as well. That would explain why he was not with a parent. He was dressed as a werewolf with a pretty elaborate costume. His mask covered his entire head with what looked like real fur, although it was probably fake. Josh quickly agreed to let him join us. We didn't recognize him from school, but having a friend in a higher grade would look good on us. By this time, Josh's mom was at least 6 or 7 houses behind us, so the three of us were pretty much on our own. We continued to knock on doors and gather candy for a while longer. Tim seemed pretty cool. He shared some of the same interests that we had: video games, music, the typical stuff. After a while, Tim stopped us and said, "Guys, there's another neighborhood where the houses are closer together. If we head over there, then we could cover more ground and get way more candy."
First of all, I would like to mention that werewolf costume ain't a bad idea to go with on Halloween. I actually dressed up as a werewolf years ago. I ended up selling the costume. But anyway, going into another neighborhood with a kid that's in a higher grade than you guys are doesn't sound bad at first because you have protection if somebody else tried to pick on you or try to steal your candy. But I guarantee that's not going to happen. He's probably going to be leading them somewhere to where he could just leave them, or something else might happen. I don't know yet, so let's just keep on trucking and find out, shall we?
"I'm in. How do we get there?" Josh asked. "We can take my dad's car. He lets me use it," Tim assured us. Like I said, I knew Tim was a few years older, but I didn't think he was old enough to drive. I was starting to feel uneasy, but when I looked over at Josh, his face was lit up. I think he was excited by the idea of going off with his cool new friend. I wanted to say no, but I was worried that I would seem like a downer, so I agreed. You know how peer pressure works. We followed Tim to his car. It was a newer model Toyota hatchback with tinted windows and a silverish paint job. It was parked on the street only a few blocks away. As we approached the car from behind, Tim unlocked the door with his remote. He got into the driver's seat and took off his mask. Josh walked around to the front seat while I opened the passenger door behind the driver. When I leaned down to get into the car, I locked eyes with Tim and almost fainted from fear. Tim must have been at least 45 years old. He was dressed up for Halloween and pretended to be a teenager. I turned around and sprinted away from the car. I didn't even try to warn Josh. I'm not proud of that last part, but it really was a fight or flight situation, and I did what I did. Luckily, after a few minutes, Josh and I found each other. It turned out that he saw me take off and realized something was wrong. Although it could have turned out worse, this was one of the scariest things that has ever happened to me. Halloween is all about being scared, but this was another level. We were too embarrassed to tell anybody what happened, so we kept the incident to ourselves. Looking back, I know we should have told someone, but we didn't. I can never be sure what that guy had planned, but I wanted no part of it.
Man, that was a close call. I was just about to say Halloween is a perfect time for creepy strangers to put on costumes and disguise themselves, and they can act like teenagers. But when they take the costume and mask off and they look a lot older, well, they pretty much tricked you. But he was probably planning on trying to lure you into his car and kidnap you for human trafficking. You never know, because it seemed like Halloween is a perfect night for them to dress up like everybody else and sneak in to where everybody's trick-or-treating and grab some people without even letting anybody else know what was going on. But once they ran away, they should have told somebody, especially the cops, because they could give a description of what he's driving and what he looked like, and they can capture that guy in the act next time, because that sounds like a guy that does not need to be on the streets at all. All right, let's get on to story number 2, shall we?
This happened to me last Halloween. I'm a single guy, and I live by myself in a small apartment complex. There are rows of townhouse-style buildings that are only 2 stories high. I live on the ground floor of one of them. It was a newer place, and all the doors were electronic. You could get into your apartment with an app on your phone if you forgot your keys. I always found that kind of thing unnecessary, but it was there if I needed it. There were some young families among my neighbors, so I usually get a few trick-or-treaters, probably only 5 or 10 for the whole night.
That sounds like a cool idea. You lose your keys or misplace them inside your apartment and you're outside the door of the place. Just use the app and boom, opens right up. But now I can see I could say pass on that too, because what happens if I did not have that app on my phone, or I didn't even have no smartphone that would work with that device? Then I'll be locked out completely. But anyway, let's just see how trick or treating is like for this man right here in his apartment complex.
We hardly ever get outsiders come in for Halloween. It's not a gated community or anything, but I figure maybe it looks like private property from the outside, so the kids from the surrounding neighborhood usually avoid it.
Well, they probably go into all the houses that are not in gated communities. But hey, if you go to a place like this, you might get some good candy, especially if it's occupied by rich folks. You know, they always go for the more bigger candy bars and those gigantic Reese's peanut butter cups and stuff. Those are to die for.
I always make sure to have a box of Halloween candy for the kids that live there, though. It started off like any other Halloween. I stayed home as usual to give out candy. Trick-or-treaters started coming to my door at around 6:30 p.m. like usual, and after probably half an hour, I had seen pretty much every kid that I recognized. Thinking that it was all over, I sat down on my couch and turned on the TV. Then I ate a few of the leftover peanut butter cups from my candy bowl. I always made sure to get candy that I actually like, since there were always leftovers. By around 8 p.m., I was almost certain that there would be no more people coming, so I walked to my front door and turned off the light. As I turned away, I heard a knock at the door. When I turned around, I could see through the small window on my door that a man was standing there. I figured that he probably had a kid with him, but since the window was at eye level for an adult, I wouldn't be able to tell. "Just a minute," I said. Then I walked to my living room to grab the candy bowl. I returned to the front door with what was left of the candy and opened it ready to dump the rest into the lucky child's bag. However, when I opened the door, I was surprised to find that the man was alone. He was about my height, and he wore a gray hoodie with black track pants. His face was cleanly shaven, and he was about 40 years old, if I had to guess. Hey, man. Sorry to bother you. I was just having some trouble with my car. Can I use your phone?
Oh, no, 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 no. Don't let him in the house. He's using that whole ploy of his car breaking down. He needs to use his phone because once you let him inside the house, he'll probably pull a weapon or knock you out and grab some valuables of yours and leave the apartment. And if you try to say, "Oh, I could call the police for you" or something, he'll probably get agitated and say, "No, can I just use your phone?" Then that tells you right there that would be a red flag.
I was obviously uncomfortable with this request. We keep our lives on our phones these days, so I don't think too many people would just hand over their phone to a complete stranger. Sorry, I don't think so. Is there someone I can call for you? I offered. Come on, buddy. It'll just take a second, if you let me do it, he pleaded. We went back and forth for a little while. I could tell that his frustration was building, which was further confirming my stance. Eventually, I said, "It's not going to happen. Just forget about it." His face turned red. I was actually afraid he was going to attack me, but he didn't. The man simply turned around and walked away. I closed the front door and made sure to lock it. Then I peered through the window and watched him as he walked away. The whole interaction left me shaken and confused, so when he was a safe distance away, I quietly opened my door and slipped out onto the street. I wanted to see where he was going. For a few blocks, I followed the guy, keeping a distance of at least 30 or 40 feet. Eventually, he made his way to the parking lot of a grocery store around the corner from my place. I watched as he got into his car and drove away. I can only speculate on exactly what he wanted with my phone, but as I mentioned before, my doors can be controlled through an app. I think he may have known that somehow and was trying to install some kind of virus on my phone so that he could rob me later. An overly elaborate plan to rob a single apartment, but that's my guess. Either way, he was a liar and definitely up to something.
Well, I'm glad you stood your ground and closed the door right in front of him. But yeah, that does sound like a good point. Why would he want to come to his apartment? He probably wanted to steal his phone just so he can upload a virus, just so he wouldn't be able to access his door lock or make a duplicate of that device and break into his apartment that way. But I don't know. But thank God he did a little investigating because it just shows that he lied about his car breaking down. It's still run. But man, I still would have been calling the police and telling them what you saw just so they can go catch that guy before he tries to do whatever he was going to do on him to somebody else. But thank God he's okay and didn't have to worry about him coming back.
When I was 13 years old, I went trick-or-treating with my friends. I was at that age where it was still acceptable to go trick-or-treating, but I was old enough that I could go without any parental supervision. A good combination. Our neighborhood was in a pretty typical suburban area. Although I had lived there for my entire life, there were still a few neighbors who I hardly knew. Some people kept to themselves, and that's fine. However, some have different reasons for staying away from others, and that's what this story is all about. It was around 6:30 p.m., and my friends Chris, Aaron, and Kevin were getting ready at my house. Chris dressed up as Harry Potter, Aaron went as Bigfoot, and Kevin just draped a sheet over his body that he was a ghost. He always had the worst costumes. I was going out as the Incredible Hulk, even though I was super skinny at the time. My parents were out at a Halloween party that night, and they were not going to be back until late. The four of us headed out and started trick-or-treating around the neighborhood.
Well, hey, don't put yourself down. I dressed up as the Incredible Hulk too one year. But also, the other costumes he named off his friends were wearing, Bigfoot, Harry Potter, and a ghost sounds cool, but I'll be kind of concerned about your friend wearing the ghost costume because somebody might think it might be recognized for something else unless it don't have no cone shape, if you know what I mean. But other than that, they should be good.
We were making great time, and it was not long before we had covered the entirety of the area. Our bags were already pretty full, but it was still early, so we decided to keep going. There was another area that we knew only about a 10-minute walk away, so the four of us headed over there and continued knocking on doors. The houses around there were a little older, and the people were older as well. I didn't know anyone at my school who actually lived there. Nonetheless, the houses were all decorated for Halloween, so we figured it would be worth it. After about half an hour, our bags were way too full to continue. It was also starting to get late, so we all split up and headed home with a great haul of candy. I opened the front door to my house and stepped inside. It was clear that my parents were still at the party because the driveway was empty. I went to the living room and sat on the couch, then turned on the TV and started eating some of my Halloween candy. About 10 minutes later, I started feeling tired and a little sick. I laid my head down on one of the decorative pillows that my mom keeps on the couch. After that, I only remember flashes of what happened.
You probably ate too much candy. Or when you went to that person's house at the last stop, they probably gave you some poison candy. That's my guess. But let's just see if that was the case, shall we?
I was feeling incredibly woozy, almost like I was half asleep. But I distinctly remember seeing a tall man walk past me on the couch. He was way too tall to be my father, and my mother was not there at all. He leaned over to me on the couch and placed a hand on my head. That's all I remember before I came to. I got up and walked to the front of the house. I looked out the window, and my father's car was still missing. My parents weren't even home yet. I checked the rest of the house, but it was completely empty. You may think that I was hallucinating or dreaming, but I don't think that can be true. I wasn't that tired. It was only about 9:30 p.m. at the time. It's hard to think of a reasonable explanation for what happened, though. I thought about it for several minutes, then I threw away the rest of my candy. I called my 3 friends and told them to do the same.
That was a wise decision on your part. Because if they ate their candy and they were starting to hallucinate, then you know that guy probably put some weird drugs into them candies. But what did he give you? I don't know. Some sort of hallucinogenic drugs. You never know. Something that he could probably inject with a syringe without opening up the wrappers. Because if the wrappers were slightly open, then you'll know, okay, something's up. But I'm just glad he got rid of the candy and did not eat no more of it. Because then he would be really messed up.
This is something that happened when I was 14 years old. Halloween was coming up, and I had recently learned that I was too old to go trick-or-treating. Although disappointed, I was excited to be growing up, and in a way, I was happy to leave the tradition behind. It was fun while it lasted, though. Even though we couldn't go trick-or-treating, my friends and I wanted to do something for Halloween. It had always been my favorite holiday, and it seemed like a shame not to go out and do something. I talked to my 2 best friends, Phil and Connor, to come up with some ideas. Phil was actually a year younger and still wanted to go trick-or-treating, but Connor and I talked him out of it. We sat down together at lunch and tried to think of something to do. Connor had been watching some of those ghost hunting shows on TV and suggested that we go to the old cemetery and try to find a ghost. I never believed in that kind of stuff, and I'm pretty sure my friends didn't either, but we decided to give it a try anyway.
I wouldn't have done that if I was you. Because if you're going into a cemetery and you're non-believers in ghosts, and if you saw one, you'll be definitely changing your mind about that, for sure. But I wouldn't go to no cemetery because you say something that sounded disrespectful, then you never know them ghosts of the people that are resting there will come back to haunt your sorry tales. But let's just see what these kids do.
Nobody came up with a better idea. We met at my house at around 6 p.m. and started walking down the street to the cemetery. The neighborhood was filled with kids dressed up for the occasion. I lived in a good suburban place. Almost every house around there had at least a few kids, so Halloween was huge. The bright streetlights shone down on the crowds of children with their parents. It brought back good memories from prior Halloweens. It was only about a 20-minute walk to the cemetery, and on the way, we cracked some jokes and reminisced about the past. None of us bothered to dress up. I never cared for the whole costume part of Halloween. To me, it was just something you had to do in order to get free candy. There was a huge wrought iron gate at the front of the cemetery. It was locked, so we walked around and found a spot where the fence was not as high. Then we climbed it, and we were in. The three of us looked at each other. There was a mutual feeling of excitement between us, probably more because we were trespassing than anything else. I don't think any of us took the whole ghost thing very seriously. We started walking past the old weathered tombstones. The cemetery was no longer active, meaning that no new graves were being dug. There was just a small crew that would come by once a week to cut the grass and stuff. So all the graves were pretty old. It was a very eerie place to be after dark. We continued walking and talking for several minutes when we started to hear a strange noise, like a constant hum off in the distance. My friends and I looked at each other. "Looks like we found our first ghost," I said sarcastically. Phil and Connor burst out laughing. We didn't think it was anything, but we decided to follow it anyway. As we got closer, the hum became more audible, and it started to sound like people chanting. There was someone there. We continued walking towards the noise, and then we saw it. There was a small group of people in the far corner of the cemetery, probably 10 of them. They were gathered in a small circle, all of them wearing dark clothes and masks. There was a single person lying on the ground in the middle of the circle, not moving. Although we couldn't make out the words to their chant, it was extremely unsettling. The three of us looked at each other. Phil and Connor were as terrified as I was. We turned around and quietly snuck out of there. I felt a tremendous relief when we were back on the lit street. We never told anybody about what we saw that night, but the three of us did discuss it amongst ourselves. Connor thought they may have just been another group of kids trying to have a fun, scary Halloween, but I don't think so. There was something chilling about that chant, and what were they doing with that one person laying on the ground in the middle of the circle? I don't know what they were up to that night, and I'm glad that we didn't stay to find out.
Well, all I can say is that you must have ran into some ritual sacrifice thing going on in the cemetery. Once you see that, don't stop to look because whoever's orchestrating that might turn and look at you and get all their members to come after you. Best thing to do, just run and call the police. They might think it's a Halloween prank, but tell them there's a real dead body on the ground there. But thankfully, nobody did not get hurt. They never thought they were going to see a cult ritual thing going on in the cemetery. I mean, I think that's the number one place that they would do something like that, is there or somewhere deep in the woods. But anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Don't forget to like, subscribe, turn on those post notifications for more Shiny Gold Tales reactions like this. This has been another successful installment of the Tin Man's Corner channel. I'm your host, Jeffrey Tin Man Taylor. And I hope you all have a good weekend. And happy Halloween early to all of you.